we're talking pizza dough. I'm gonna show you how to make it, how to portion it, how to stretch it, and some tips and tricks along the way for problems you'll probably encounter when dealing with pizza dough. Now for the dough. If you're here just for the recipe, then go ahead and skip ahead. I'll put a little breakpoint and you can just watch that. But if you're intrigued by the ins and outs of dough, then stick around. One of the most important tools you're gonna need for doing dough are some kitchen scales. I have a bigger one that I use for the flour and water, and then I have one of these smaller scales that can measure grams a lot more accurate than these bigger ones, and I'll use that for the salt and yeast. The bigger one isn't as precise with the yeast, so it's always good to pick up one of the smaller ones. Great thing about being able to weigh it is you can adjust this recipe a lot easier than if we were doing half cup, quarter cup, because I can give you this recipe and you can cut it in half and get half the results, or do a third of it. It's a lot easier to change the numbers when you weigh it. So well worth the investment. The dough recipe is 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast. A lot of people will say don't use sugar, don't use oil, and I feel like it depends on what your goal is. I did a little experiment. You can see this picture here. I cooked all these pizzas in my pizza oven on 900 degrees for 1.5 minutes, every single one of them, and they had the same amount of sauce. I didn't do cheese or toppings because I was trying to save a buck. So here on the top left is the control. That's the recipe I'm gonna show you right now. And on the right is sugar, and you can see the difference just between those two. The sugar had more scorch marks, and I even noticed while cooking it, I had to be really careful. It was burning really quickly, but it did get browning throughout, you can see. And then on the bottom here, we have sugar and oil on the left, and then oil on the bottom right. So pretty much all of them except the control tended to burn a little bit more. And I always thought if you added any sugar or oil, it was just gonna ruin it. And I don't feel like that's the case. I think it makes it harder to cook with, but I don't think it's worth adding the sugar and oil at this point. I would just stick with the 4 ingredients for Neapolitan style pizza dough. But let's look at New York style. Okay, here you can see the top left, the control, and all of these I cooked in the Chefman electric pizza oven on the New York setting for 5 minutes. Same deal here with the sauce. You can see the top left, it's not very browned. I'm not loving that. But the sugar and oil and the oil all tended to do better. I think the pure oil one didn't do as well. So I would say, based on this picture, I mean, look at that browning. That's some great browning on the sugar one. So if you're gonna be doing New York style, I would add to this amount I'm gonna show you 2 tablespoons of oil and 2 tablespoons of sugar. And that will help you get the browning you need for New York style or thin crust. It works for both. So now let's get into the flour. This is bread flour. A lot of people will say use 00 flour, which is great, but for me, it's hard to get in my area and it's kind of expensive. I just get this bread flour from Costco. I've used all-purpose flour in the past, and if you're in a bind, it works. I've noticed the dough is a little stronger and stays together a little more with the bread flour, so it's worth doing, but all-purpose will work in a pinch. The water, I like to have mine about 95 degrees, around there, like warm water. It will help the yeast bloom a little quicker. Salt, I use table salt just because it dissolves quicker. The yeast. So this is where we can kind of control our results of the dough. I have here 2 grams of yeast. I'll usually make this dough the night before I want to cook the pizza for dinner. So I'll make the dough in the evening, put it in the fridge, let it sit all night. Then in the morning I'll get it out on the counter and let it bulk ferment. Then about an hour and a half before I want to eat, I'll portion the dough. But if you're in a hurry and you made it the morning of, you can put it in the oven on proof setting or turn it on like just for a few minutes and then turn it back off, and it will help it bloom a little faster. And if you're really in a hurry, let's say it's 2 in the afternoon and you really want pizza, then just up your yeast amount to about 10 grams. It won't have as much flavor, it won't taste as good, but it will still work. So you can control how quick you want to use the dough with how much yeast you use. Some people think you need to put sugar with your yeast to get it to grow, to blossom. Here you can see that I have the 3 different bins, and all of them rose to the same amount. The one with the sugar and oil, and just the oil. So the oil one had no sugar at all. All of them rose to the same amount. So you do not need to add sugar for your dough to rise. Let's talk hydration. So this recipe has 1,000 grams of flour and 700 milliliters of water. So that means it's a 70% hydration. It's a water based on flour ratio. Depending on where you live, your hydration levels will be different. If you're in a drier climate, you're gonna want a higher hydration. If you're somewhere where it's super humid, you're gonna wanna do a lower hydration. So these numbers I'm giving you are a baseline. If the dough just keeps coming out way too wet or too dry, adjust accordingly. On to putting the dough together. First thing I'm gonna do is put some really warm water into a bowl. This is 700 milliliters. Then we go in with our 2 grams of yeast. I like to just take a whisk real quick, give it a little mix, help speed up the process there. Now we're gonna add 1,000 grams of bread flour. Okay, and then on top, I like to add the salt after. I haven't tested this yet, so I don't know for sure, but a lot of bakers will say that if you put the salt with the yeast right away, it can affect it. So I just keep them a little separate. 22 grams of table salt. And you can mix this by hand. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's go ahead and get going. Get this all mixed up. Popped it off real quick to show you that all the flour has been incorporated, but it's still more of like a shaggy dough. Looks almost more like biscuits. So you want to go further than this. We need that flour to really mix in all throughout. Okay, so our dough is ready. Let me show you what that looks like. Our dough has come together a lot more. It's got a smoother texture to it. Some gluten. So our dough, it's not as shaggy before. It doesn't look like a biscuit dough. It's coming together more as a solid, smooth mass. If you're making this dough in like 2 hours, or you're gonna be making pizzas in like 2 hours, you'd wanna get it to a point where you can do the window pane test, which is stretching it out and you can see through it like a window pane without it tearing. This is tearing, so this wouldn't be ready. You'd wanna knead it more. But since we're leaving this all night long, it has plenty of time to develop all that gluten. But on a shorter schedule, knead it longer. So when you're done, I like to put it into a bin with a lid. You can use a bowl with saran wrap. We just want to make sure it's not drying out. So if you are making this the night before, generally I like to leave it out at room temperature for about an hour just to give it a little head start on proofing, and then put it in the fridge overnight. Get it out the next morning so you can let it bulk ferment all day before you portion the dough. Our dough is ready to go. What I like to do is flour my work surface a little bit so it doesn't stick. You can use a bench scrape, spatula, or your hand. Scrape the dough out onto your work surface. Get it all. Okay, when I'm portioning my dough, I like to keep a wet side, so it's sticky, and a dry side underneath, not sticky, okay? And use a scale. You're gonna need a scale to make pizza. So we're going for 245 grams per dough ball. So you're just gonna eyeball it in the beginning. As you do this more and more, you'll get better at it, hopefully. And I also like to keep just a little pile of flour up here and just dip it in so we don't have any wet wet dough sticking to the scale. Okay, so we're at 234. So now I'm just gonna take a little bit and add it. 243, close enough. This is why I like to keep a wet side. Because if we took that wet dough and added it to this dry side, it's gonna have a harder time getting incorporated. Where you can see this, nice and sticky. So now what we wanna do is fold it up like a dumpling. I like to grab, here's a quick way to do it. Grab the corners, pull them up and over till you've made a nice smooth spot here. Pinch it together. See how there's holes here? We don't want that. We want to seal that up. Those holes are going to make our dough have weak spots. So seal it up. Now we want to create some tension on the ball so it makes a nice round circle. Dip your dry side in some flour. I place the wet side of the ball right here on my hand, like so, and I squeeze and rotate. Squeeze, rotate. And you can tell this will start getting, this skin here will get tighter and tighter. And I just go until it's got a nice, smooth sheen to it. Check the bottom that it's all sewn up. Okay, nice good seal there. And I like to take a cookie sheet, ham it, and then throw your dough ball on, wet side down. Right here. You can fit these size balls on a normal baking sheet, you can fit 12. Let's do one more. This one's gonna be a little big. Yeah, 269. So when it's too big, I just chop it. Oh, 241, close enough. And then I'll have little scraps I'll just keep on the top, and you can add them to dough balls that are a little too small. So all four corners. Okay, and then I even will sometimes put my hand underneath, and just roll my finger toward the middle to try and seal it all up. We want a nice, smooth texture here. You're probably wondering, when should I be doing this? Well, what I normally do is I'll portion the dough an hour and a half before I want to make the pizza. So I'll fill up this sheet pan, leave it out, and within about an hour to an hour and a half, the dough has risen enough that it's usable. You can also do it 6 hours before and put it directly in the fridge, and it will slowly rise and be ready to go around that 6 hour mark or later. It's gonna take at least about 6 hours, but you could do it later. So if you know you're gonna be out running errands, you wanna come home and just start making pizzas, that's a great way to do it. The reason why I like to measure every dough ball and get a good consistent number is if I had one that was 200 grams and another one that was 300, and you're stretching them both out, if you're stretching them both out to a 12-inch pizza, when you stretch out, let's say this is a dough ball, when we stretch this out to the 12 inches, your 200 gram dough ball is gonna be super thin and is more likely to tear. And your 300 gram is probably gonna be a little too thick of a crust and you may not enjoy it as much. So it's a lot more consistent when you measure it. So as you go along, if you don't like the thickness, you can adjust and do less or more weight. You're ready to stretch your dough. This is one of the harder parts of making pizzas. So I've got step-by-step tutorial here to show you how to stretch your pizza dough. First thing you're gonna need is some flour. I like to add cornmeal to it. So this is about 3/4 cornmeal and 1/4 flour. This will help everything stay nice and dry and not stick. So first thing we're gonna do is show you how to carefully take out a dough ball. So let's go for this one right here. So I'll just sprinkle a little flour on the parts of the dough that are stuck together and just slice it free. Very gently, we don't want to be too rough with it. Okay, so we've got it loose. And now we're just gonna pour this on our work surface and just plop it right on it. Okay, and I'm going to show you a few different ways to do this, from beginner level to a little more advanced. But in all of them, we're going to do this first step. Okay, so we want to get it coated so it is nice and non-sticky. We're going to press at the top here, and you'll see I'm leaving a crust. So we're going to press and make our way down and leave a crust on the bottom. Work around the sides, and you're leaving a crust all around, about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch crust. Then I like to flip it over, do the same thing, and that's pretty much our base for all the techniques I'm going to show you today. The first technique I'm going to show you is one that's great if you're starting off or if you have friends coming over wanting to learn. This method I find to be a little more foolproof. And it takes a little longer, but it works great. So it's exactly what we just did, but you're just going to do it over and over. And the key here is you need a good pile of this cornmeal flour mixture. If you were doing this just on the table over and over, it would stick. Over time, it would start sticking. Plus, this sliding helps it to expand. So you can see as I'm pressing around and still leaving that crust, the pizza is expanding. Okay, flip it. And I try and when I flip it, try and do like a 90-degree turn. Press it out. You can see already it's starting to get bigger. Get your pile closer together. Press. You might be worried about all this cornmeal going into the dough. There's not nearly as much that goes in as you would think. We'll shake it all off at the end. And then you'll start to get to a point where you can almost just press it with your whole hand. And it just starts going out further and further. The great thing about this, I'll show you, is you don't have any really weak spots, which that's what happens to most people when they first start trying to stretch dough, is they tear it or make weak spots. This helps prevent that. And what you can do if you want to get a little more advanced is kind of stretch it out as you push. And this kind of leads into my next technique. So from this point, what you can have people do is get your hands like this, okay, like that, and just pull the dough apart. Shift and pull it apart. What's great about this technique is it's also knocking off the corn flour. Okay. And I'd say with that, let's check. So I always keep a peel nearby to check our size. Okay, we could go a little more because we want to fill up that whole peel. So for the beginner technique, just keep stretching it, or bring your pile back, throw it on, press it down. See how my whole hand's fitting in here now? That just goes to show how much it's stretching. And then try and knock off that excess corn flour. Stretch it out. Now let's check it. Okay, that's a lot better. So it's close enough that when we get the toppings on, we can still stretch it to the edges. So that's pretty good. Okay, so we have another base here. I'm going to show you a little bit more advanced technique, probably one of my favorites. So we did our same drill here where we pressed it out. We're keeping a crust. And the key here is you need to have a lot of this corn flour and a surface that it will slip on. If you did it on like a grippy hard, like a wood surface, it doesn't work as well. It starts to tear the dough. That's why I'm over here today. So I'll show you. We're here. Keep your hands like this and spread it out. And slowly what you're going to do is you take your palms and you're pressing down here, leaving a crust, and spreading and rotating. You're kind of using your whole hand here to rotate it, and stretch it. Every once in a while, just scoop up your corn flour again. And now I'm just pressing down and twisting. And you can see this method's quite a bit quicker. We've already stretched it quite a bit. That's why it's one of my favorites. It gets stretched pretty quick. And then we knock off the excess. We've got ourselves a nice 12-inch pizza. Okay. Now probably one of the more advanced techniques. Let's say we were starting off with a smaller one and we'd stretched it out, but it's still not quite big enough. That's where the twist comes in. You don't even have to go that high. And the key with the twist, you always want to keep your hands more rounded. You don't want to point up because that will tear the dough. So keep your hands more rounded. On the edges, you don't ever really want to punch the middle. That's the weakest point. You'll probably tear it. And just give it little twists. So knock that corn flour off. This is actually probably my favorite way to finish a pizza. I'll show you why. Look how big that is already. I mean, that's right to the edges on that peel. So the little toss at the end is a great way. Okay, so now we're gonna try one of the dough balls we made about 8 hours ago and put in the fridge to let it rise in the fridge. Let's give it a try. I literally just pulled this out of the fridge about 3 minutes ago. I didn't even let it come up to room temp or anything. And let's see how it goes. Same deal. Coat it in the cornmeal flour mix. Keep a crust. Also, one of the reasons I flip is because the dough starts to get a little wet on my fingers when I'm pressing, because it's stretching out and exposing some of that wet dough. But for a dough being this cold, it's stretching pretty quick. Okay, let's check it out. I mean, that did really well. So, like I said, both are viable options. I like the option to put it in the fridge because then you can go out on your day. Oh, flour my eyes. You can go about your day and come back and just whip these up really quick. So, some tips and tricks for problems you'll probably encounter when dealing with pizza dough. The first trick I want to show you is when your pizza is completely stuck to the peel. This thing's not going anywhere. First thing you're going to need is a plate. So with the plate, put it over top and flip. And then slowly pull it off. See how it's all stuck? Boom. Okay, now key part, flour. Boom, 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 boom. You know what you can do too? You can be very generous here. Because I'll show you a little trick to get rid of the extra flour. Spread it around. That way we're not sticking anymore. Okay, we want that nice and dry. You might be thinking, dude, YouTube guy, that's too much flour. Well, let's see. So now we flip it back over. Okay. Sometimes you might need to readdress the toppings a little bit. But for the most part, the benefit of this, our toppings aren't completely messed up, okay? And now our pizza moves, and watch. All that extra flour we're gonna get rid of, shaking it around. Now our pizza is free to slide right into the oven. You're about to launch your pizza, and it's moving, but you got one little spot that's stuck, okay? So you can do the total flip, or since this is the spot that's stuck, you can peel that part up, and then you always just want to make sure the peel's dry, okay, because that could be the wet spot, maybe from sauce. Take a little flour. Actually, it doesn't have to be a little because we'll shake it off like we did with the other one. get it dry. Okay, make sure there's no more wet spots. And then fold it back over, fix your toppings, and you're free to go again. We got one little spot that's stuck. We're on a wooden peel now. The trick from the last video would work here as well, but we've got an easier way to do it on the wooden peel. Also, they get stuck in the front a lot because as you're launching forward, if you got some sauce up front and you've moved it around, the sauce is kind of settled underneath, you'll get that. And what happens when you launch is it folds forward, you get toppings all over. Here's a quick and easy way to fix that. Take like a metal spatula with a little flour on it and just go under it and you're free to go. You're out by the oven and you're about to launch your pizza and it's just a little bit stuck. Like it moves a little bit, you're a little worried. So what you can do, pull up the crust, blow under it, and then it'll just glide. You've made your pizza on the counter and it's stuck. It is stuck to the counter. One of the things, tip, make sure when you go to get it, you don't have sauce on the counter right here. But it is stuck. Here's what we do. Flour right along there, okay? Work it in. And now, get rid of the excess flour, and we're good to go. I hope that this video has helped build your confidence in making pizza dough. I've got some other great videos on pizza recipes and other pizza things in the description below. That's the one. Double thumbs up.